Late at night, the village of Hollow Creek seemed to hold its breath. No lights flickered in the windows, no voices carried on the wind, and even the animals were eerily silent. Behind bolted doors and shuttered windows, the villagers huddled together, whispering prayers and clutching talismans. Something stalked their streets after dark, something that no one dared to name aloud. Old Smoky and his wife, Mary, were outsiders to the village. That evening, they had traveled miles over rough, winding mountain trails to visit their old friend, Eli Wren. The journey had been grueling, but Smoky wasn't one to let the growing darkness slow him down. "Nothing in the dark that isn't there in the light," he'd always said. But as they entered Hollow Creek, even Smoky felt a shiver of unease. The empty streets, the oppressive silence. It wasn't natural. "Where is everyone?" Mary asked, clutching her shawl tightly. Smoky's eyes scanned the shadows. "Something's wrong. Let's get to Eli's place and find out." The couple approached Eli's house, only to find it locked tight. Smoky knocked, then pounded on the door. "Eli, you in there, or have you gone deaf?" For a moment, there was no response. Then the door creaked open, revealing Eli's pale, drawn face. "Smoky, Mary, get in, quickly." The grim truth. Inside, Eli bolted the door and pulled the curtains closed, casting the room in a dim, flickering glow from the single lamp. His hands trembled as he gestured for them to sit. "What's going on, Eli?" Smoky asked, pouring himself a drink from a half-empty bottle on the table. "The whole village looks like it's bracing for the end of the world." Eli sat heavily in a chair, rubbing his temples. "It's not safe here after dark, Smoky. Something unnatural is happening. We've been living in fear for weeks." "Unnatural how?" Smoky pressed. Eli took a deep breath. "It started about 2 weeks ago. A young couple in the village, newlyweds, had a terrible fight. The husband lost his temper and struck his wife. She hit her head on the corner of the table and died." Mary gasped, covering her mouth. "That's awful." Eli nodded grimly. "Her body was kept at their home for 2 days, waiting for burial. But on the second night, she came back." Mary's eyes widened. "Came back? As in, alive?" "Not alive," Eli said. "She was a zombie, a walking corpse. Her body was stiff, her movements unnatural. She didn't walk. She hopped, like something out of a nightmare. Her face," he shuddered, "it was twisted, decayed. She roamed the village all night, her glowing eyes looking for something. People who saw her screamed. One man fainted, dead away. A nightmare unfolds." Smoky leaned forward. "What happened next?" "She went after the chickens," Eli said. "Killed everyone she could find. Drank their blood. By dawn, she collapsed like a corpse again, and we buried her. We thought it was over." He let out a bitter laugh. "We were wrong. The next night, she was back, hungrier, more vicious." "And no one stopped her?" Smoky asked. Eli shook his head. "We were too scared. After the animals were gone, she started trying to break into houses. We bolted our doors and hid, but Smoky, we can't live like this. You've dealt with things like this before. You have to help us." Smoky stood and stretched. "Sounds like a vengeful spirit to me. Half ghost, half zombie. She won't stop until she's satisfied." "What do we do?" Eli pleaded. "We set a trap," Smoky said. "Gather your bravest men, some black dogs, and plenty of bait. This thing's feeding on blood, and we'll use that to lure her out." Setting the trap. That night, Smoky led the villagers in preparing the trap. A fresh goat was slaughtered and left in the village square, its blood pooling on the ground. The metallic scent hung heavy in the air, a beacon for the undead. Everyone else hid indoors, leaving only Smokey, Eli, and a pack of black dogs tied nearby. The hours dragged on, and the night grew colder. Just as Smokey began to doubt, a shadow appeared at the edge of the square. It hopped closer, its movements jerky and unnatural. Smokey gritted his teeth as the figure stepped into the moonlight. The zombie bride was horrifying to behold. Her once beautiful wedding dress hung in tattered shreds, and her face was a grotesque mask of decay. Her eyes glowed faintly, like dying embers, as she staggered toward the bait. She pounced on the goat, tearing into it with inhuman speed. Smokey shouted, "Release the dogs!" The villagers untied the dogs, and they charged forward, barking ferociously. The zombie bride recoiled, hissing like a wild animal. She tried to flee, but the dogs drove her toward the edge of the village. The villagers followed, torches in hand, their fear tempered by determination. The final stand. The chase led to the old cemetery at the edge of town. The zombie bride dove into an open grave, disappearing into the dark earth. Smokey raised a hand, stopping the villagers. "Don't go in after her. She's stronger at night. We'll seal her in and wait for dawn." Using nets soaked in black dog's blood, they covered the grave's opening. Smokey instructed the men to keep watch until sunrise. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, the villagers gathered around the grave. Smokey handed a long hook to one of the men. "Let's see if she's still down there." The man hesitated, but obeyed, reaching into the grave. After a tense moment, he pulled out the body. Under the sunlight, the corpse began to writhe, black smoke rising from its flesh. A low, guttural growl escaped its throat. "She's waking up," someone shouted. "Not for long," Smokey said, tossing a torch onto the body. "Get the firewood." The villagers quickly piled wood around the corpse. The flames roared to life, and the zombie bride let out a blood-curdling scream as the fire consumed her. The smoke spiraled into the sky, and then silence, a lingering unease. As the ashes cooled, the villagers breathed a collective sigh of relief. Eli clapped Smokey on the back. "You did it. You saved us." "Maybe," Smokey said, his gaze lingering on the forest beyond the cemetery. "But remember this, the dead don't always stay where they're put. Respect them, or they might come back." That night, the villagers held a feast to celebrate their deliverance. But as Smokey sat by the fire, his expression was grim. Mary leaned over. "What's wrong?" Smokey shook his head. "Just a feeling." Far beyond the firelight, in the shadowed woods, a pair of faintly glowing eyes watched, unblinking.